She didn't ask if this was the right house. She only whispered, "Is this where Samuel Walker lived?" The rain had been falling for nearly an hour when Ethan Walker heard 3 quiet knocks on the weathered front door of his small farmhouse outside Cedar Ridge, Missouri. He glanced up from the old kitchen table where unpaid bills sat beside a half-finished science project his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had proudly built from cardboard and popsicle sticks. Most people who came this far down the gravel road either knew him well enough to call first or were neighbors needing help fixing an engine, replacing a fence post, or repairing a leaking roof. Nobody arrived in silence. Nobody arrived in a convoy of black luxury SUVs. Ethan pulled aside the curtain. Headlights reflected across puddles like scattered stars. Men in dark suits stood respectfully beside polished vehicles, but none of them moved toward the porch. They weren't here to intimidate anyone. They were waiting. In the center of the driveway stood a woman beneath a black umbrella. Her charcoal business coat looked tailored, elegant without being loud, while the rain gathered along its edges before falling softly into the mud below. She carried no briefcase, no jewelry that demanded attention, only a small leather folder pressed gently against her side. Lily looked up from the floor where she had been coloring. "Daddy, are those movie people?" Ethan managed the faintest smile. "I don't think so, sweetheart." He opened the front door. Cool autumn air drifted inside, carrying the scent of wet pine, fresh earth, and distant chimney smoke. The woman stepped forward, her expression calm but strangely uncertain, as though this moment had lived inside her heart for years and reality suddenly felt smaller than the memory. "Good evening," she said quietly. "I'm looking for Samuel Walker." Ethan's eyes softened. "I am Soda Kropka." A brief silence settled between them, broken only by rain tapping against the porch roof. "My father passed away 12 years ago." She closed her eyes for just a second. Not dramatically, not with despair, more like someone accepting that time had finally won a race she had spent decades trying to outrun. When she opened them again, they shimmered with gratitude rather than sorrow. "Then I came too late to thank him." Ethan waited. She looked toward the faded rocking chair that still sat untouched beside the front window. "But perhaps," she continued almost in a whisper, "I'm not too late to repay what he did." Ethan frowned slightly. "I think you have the wrong family." She slowly shook her head. "No, Mr. Walker. I've spent 23 years making sure I found the right one." Another gentle silence settled over the porch. Somewhere across the fields, a train horn echoed through the evening. Inside the house, Lily peeked carefully around her father's arm, studying the stranger with innocent curiosity. The woman noticed her and offered the smallest smile. It was warm, genuine, almost familiar. Ethan had never seen her before in his life. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, it felt as though the past had just knocked on his door wearing someone else's face. For several long seconds, Ethan said nothing. He had learned years ago that silence often revealed more than hurried questions ever could. The woman standing on his porch did not seem impatient. She simply waited, holding the leather folder with both hands, as if it contained something far more valuable than paper. Finally, Ethan stepped aside. "You should come in before the rain gets any heavier." She nodded gratefully. "Thank you." The warmth of the small farmhouse wrapped around her the moment she crossed the threshold. A kettle hummed softly on the stove. Family photographs lined a narrow wooden shelf above the fireplace. Most of them showed ordinary moments that would never make headlines: fishing trips at the lake, homemade birthday cakes, school concerts, and one faded picture of an older man teaching a young boy how to replace the tire on an old pickup truck. The woman stopped in front of that photograph. Her breathing caught, almost imperceptibly. "That is him," she whispered. Ethan looked toward the frame. "That was my father about 20 years before he passed." Lily wandered into the living room, carrying her coloring book. "Daddy, should I make hot chocolate?" Ethan smiled. "Only if our guest would like some." The woman looked at Lily with gentle eyes. "I would love that. Thank you." Lily hurried toward the kitchen with the determined excitement only a child could have when given an important job. The house suddenly felt lighter. Ethan motioned toward the worn couch. "Please sit down." She carefully removed her coat before taking a seat, her attention drifting once more towards Samuel's photograph. "My name is Victoria Sterling," she finally said. Ethan recognized the name instantly. Even in a small Missouri town, everyone had heard of Sterling Global Industries. Her interviews appeared on television. Business magazines called her one of the most influential chief executive officers in America. Yet sitting in his living room, she seemed nothing like the confident executive the world admired. She looked like someone carrying a promise for far too many years. Ethan folded his arms. "I have to admit, I do not understand why someone like you would come all the way here because of my father." Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before opening the leather folder. Inside rested a single yellowed photograph protected by clear plastic. She slid it carefully across the coffee table. Ethan picked it up. The image showed his father standing beside an old pickup truck outside what appeared to be a small roadside diner. Next to him stood a little girl wearing an oversized winter coat, several sizes too big. Her smile was cautious, almost uncertain, but Samuel's expression carried the same quiet kindness Ethan remembered from childhood. "That little girl," Victoria said softly, changed her name years later. But before she became Victoria Sterling, before anyone knew her, before success or boardrooms or newspapers, she was simply a frightened child with nowhere safe to go. Ethan slowly looked from the photograph back to the woman sitting across from him. Nothing about the picture felt staged. The edges were worn from being held too many times. The silence inside the farmhouse deepened as rain continued tapping gently against the windows. And for the first time, Ethan realized that whatever story had brought this remarkable woman to his front door had begun, long before he was old enough to understand it. Victoria wrapped both hands around the warm mug of hot chocolate, yet she did not drink from it immediately. Instead, she continued looking at the faded photograph as though every crease carried another forgotten memory. Ethan leaned back quietly, allowing the silence to breathe. His father had always believed that people told the truth more easily when they were not rushed. After several moments, Victoria spoke, her voice softer than the rain outside. "I was 11 years old when I met your father. My mother had passed away only months before, and the relatives who promised to care for me disappeared one by one. I wandered farther than I should have, pretending everything was fine because I believed asking for help made people leave even faster." Ethan listened without interrupting. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug nearby, coloring carefully while pretending not to listen at all. One November afternoon, Victoria continued, "I reached a little roadside diner nearly 20 miles from here. I remember the smell of fresh coffee, homemade pie, and wet leaves blowing across the parking lot. I had not eaten since the day before. I stood outside staring through the window because I knew I could not afford even a sandwich." She smiled faintly at the memory. "Most people walked past me. Some looked away because they were busy. Others simply never noticed a frightened little girl standing in an oversized coat. Your father noticed." Ethan lowered his eyes. That sounded exactly like Samuel Walker. He came outside carrying a paper bag. He never asked uncomfortable questions. He never demanded explanations. He simply handed me a grilled cheese sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of milk. Then he sat beside me on the curb while we watched cars drive past. We barely spoke for 10 minutes. Victoria laughed quietly through the emotion gathering in her voice. Finally, I asked him why he was helping a stranger. He looked toward the sunset and said something I have repeated to myself for more than 20 years. He said, "Because one day you will meet someone who needs kindness more than answers." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. He could almost hear his father's calm voice saying those exact words. Victoria reached into the folder again and unfolded a small receipt, faded almost white with age. "This is all I kept from that day. He bought me dinner, a warm coat, and a bus ticket to St. Louis after calling a family friend who worked with children in need. He never asked for his money back. He never asked anyone to remember his name." Ethan studied the worn receipt with quiet disbelief. The date matched a period when his father had been struggling to keep their old farm running after a season of failed crops. Samuel could barely afford new boots for himself that winter, yet somehow he had found enough to help someone else. Victoria looked around the modest farmhouse once more. Every handmade shelf, every repaired chair, every carefully preserved family photograph reflected the same quiet character she had never forgotten. She looked back at Ethan with grateful eyes. "The world believes I built everything because I was determined," she said gently. "The truth is much simpler. Everything I became started with one ordinary man who believed that compassion was worth more than comfort, even when he had almost nothing to spare." The room remained quiet long after Victoria finished speaking. The only sounds were the steady ticking of the old wall clock and the rain easing into a gentle drizzle beyond the kitchen window. Ethan carefully placed the faded receipt back onto the coffee table as though it belonged in a museum instead of an ordinary farmhouse. He had always known his father was generous, but he had never imagined the reach of that generosity. Samuel Walker had never told stories about helping strangers. If he had done something good, he simply moved on to the next day as though kindness required no audience. Lily looked up from her coloring book and asked the question neither adult had been ready to ask. "Did Grandpa know you would become famous?" Victoria smiled warmly and shook her head. "No, sweetheart. He believed people should help because it was the right thing to do, not because they expected anything in return." Lily nodded thoughtfully before returning to her drawing, carefully adding another bright flower beside the little farmhouse she had sketched. Ethan watched his daughter for a moment, seeing the same quiet heart that had lived inside his father. Victoria slowly opened the leather folder one more time and removed a thin envelope that had clearly traveled many miles. "After I reached St. Louis, your father called twice to make sure I was safe. The family that welcomed me eventually adopted me. They gave me a home, an education, and every opportunity a child could hope for. Years later, I earned a scholarship, studied engineering, started a small company with 2 friends, and somehow that small company became something much larger than I ever imagined." She paused, almost embarrassed by her own success. "Every major decision I made began with one question. What would the man outside that diner have done?" Ethan leaned forward. "If you remembered him all these years, why did it take so long to find us?" Victoria let out a slow breath. "Because your father disappeared without trying to disappear. He changed jobs, moved after the old diner closed, and refused every attempt to be recognized. The records were incomplete. People remembered his first name, but not always his last. More than once I followed the wrong trail across 3 different states." She gave a quiet laugh. "One reporter once spent 6 months trying to discover who inspired my scholarship foundation. Even my own board of directors never knew the answer because I could never prove who he was." She looked around the farmhouse again, noticing the hand-built bookshelf, the repaired wooden table, and the carefully patched curtains that still looked clean and welcoming. "Last spring I hired a private research team, not to invade anyone's privacy, but to finish a promise I made as a little girl. 3 weeks ago, they found an old property tax record with Samuel Walker's name. Yesterday, they confirmed this address." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, still trying to absorb everything he had heard. "So after 23 years, Victoria finished his sentence with gentle certainty. "After 23 years, I finally found the family of the man who quietly changed my life without ever asking whether I would remember his name. I only prayed I was not too late to honor the promise I made to myself the day he handed a frightened little girl a warm meal and reminded her that real wealth begins with a generous heart." Victoria rested her hands on the leather folder and looked directly at Ethan with the calm confidence that had earned the respect of boardrooms across the country. Yet there was nothing intimidating about her expression now. It carried only gratitude. "I did not come here simply to tell you a story," she said softly. "I came because I have waited more than 2 decades to keep a promise." She reached into the folder once again and placed a cream-colored envelope on the coffee table. It was thick, carefully sealed, and bore only Ethan's name written in elegant handwriting. Ethan looked at it without touching it. "What is it?" "Victoria Anserdanistli. It is a financial gift for you and Lily. It is enough to pay off your home, secure Lily's education through college, and remove every burden that should never have been yours to carry alone." The room fell silent. Even the old clock seemed louder than before. Ethan stared at the envelope for several long moments before gently pushing it back across the table. Victoria blinked in surprise. "You have not even opened it." Ethan smiled politely. "I do not need to." She searched his face, convinced he must have misunderstood. "Please do not think of this as charity. This is gratitude. Your father changed my life." Ethan slowly shook his head. "If my father helped you because he hoped someone would someday repay him, then you have misunderstood the man you came here to honor." Victoria remained still. She had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation, but those quiet words left her without an immediate response. Ethan continued in the same calm voice. "My father fixed tractors for neighbors who could not pay him. He spent weekends repairing roofs for widows after storms. He never kept score. He believed kindness stopped being kindness the moment it expected interest." Lily looked up from her drawing and asked innocently, "Daddy, does that mean Grandpa gave away things because they made people smile?" Ethan smiled at his daughter. "Exactly, sweetheart." Lily nodded as though that explained everything in the world. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the envelope. For years, she had imagined this moment. She had believed the greatest way to honor Samuel Walker was to erase every financial struggle his family might have endured. Now she realized she had been measuring gratitude with numbers, while the man she admired had measured life very differently. Ethan folded his hands together. "I am thankful that you remembered him. I truly am. Hearing what he did for you is already a gift I never expected. But if I accept money simply because my father was kind, then I turn his character into a transaction. That is not the lesson he spent his whole life teaching me." Victoria felt unexpected tears gathering in her eyes. Not from embarrassment, but from recognition. The same quiet dignity she had admired in Samuel all those years ago was sitting across from her in his son. Different face, different generation, the very same heart. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and a thin beam of evening sunlight slipped through the clouds, filling the farmhouse with a warm golden glow. Victoria slowly picked up the unopened envelope and held it close, understanding that for the first time in 23 years, her journey was not ending at this little farmhouse. In many ways, it had only just begun. Victoria remained seated for another minute, gently tracing the edge of the unopened envelope with her fingertips before sliding it back into the leather folder. There was no disappointment in her expression anymore. Instead, there was understanding. Samuel Walker had never rescued a frightened child with money alone. He had restored hope by treating her with dignity. Ethan had just done exactly the same thing. He had refused to let gratitude become a business transaction. Victoria smiled softly. "I think your father would be proud of the man you have become." Ethan looked toward the old photograph above the fireplace. "I hope so. Every day, I try to make choices that would not embarrass him." Lily skipped into the kitchen, carrying the empty mugs. "Daddy always says people remember how you make them feel longer than what you give them." Victoria laughed quietly. "Your father has been teaching you well." Lily grinned. "He says Grandpa taught him first." The words settled warmly inside the room. Outside, the clouds had begun to separate, revealing streaks of orange across the evening sky. Victoria slowly closed the leather folder and stood. Ethan assumed the visit was ending, but instead of walking toward the front door, she paused beside the old bookshelf where several worn family albums rested. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. If your father were standing here today, and I asked him how to repay his kindness, what do you think he would tell me?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He glanced toward the backyard where an old swing moved gently in the breeze. "He would probably smile and tell you that you're asking the wrong question." Victoria tilted her head with curiosity. Ethan continued. "He believed kindness was never supposed to circle back to the person who started it. He believed it should keep moving forward until someone else needed it." Victoria repeated those words quietly to herself. "Keep moving forward." She nodded almost imperceptibly, as though a complicated equation she had struggled with for years had finally become simple. "Then perhaps I have been trying to repay the wrong person all this time." Ethan looked at her with quiet interest. She continued, "Your father did not help me so that I could someday help his family. He helped me so that I would become the kind of person who noticed someone standing alone outside a diner." Ethan smiled. "Now you sound like him." For the first time that evening, Victoria felt the weight she had carried for 23 years become lighter. She no longer needed Ethan to accept a check. She needed to honor Samuel Walker by living the lesson he had given her. She reached into her purse, removed a simple business card, and placed it gently on the coffee table. "I'm staying at the old inn in town for a few days. I would like to learn more about your father if you are willing to share his stories. And while I am here, I would also like to spend time in this community without cameras, announcements, or headlines. Just as another neighbor." Ethan picked up the card, but made no promises. "We are having the annual Harvest Festival on Saturday. Nothing fancy. Homemade pies, school music, tractor displays, and too much barbecue." Victoria's smile widened with genuine excitement. "That sounds far more valuable than another charity gala." Lily clapped her hands. "Then you have to come. Everybody belongs at the Harvest Festival." Victoria looked at the little girl and quietly realized that Samuel Walker's greatest gift had never been changing one frightened child's future. His greatest gift was creating a legacy that still welcomed strangers as though they had been family all along. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in clear blue skies and the crisp scent of early fall. The town park slowly filled with families carrying folding chairs, homemade desserts, and warm conversations that seemed to drift as easily as the breeze through the maple trees. Children laughed beside hay bales stacked for decoration. Local musicians tuned their guitars on a small wooden stage, and the aroma of smoked barbecue mixed with fresh apple cider until the entire square felt like a memory someone had carefully preserved. Ethan parked his aging pickup near the edge of the field, helping Lily carry the blueberry pie they had baked together before sunrise. She proudly balanced the dish with both hands as though she had been trusted with the most important job in town. "Do you think Victoria will really come?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "She said she would. That is enough for me." They had barely reached the entrance when a familiar voice greeted them. "I hope I am not late." Ethan turned to see Victoria walking toward them wearing blue jeans, comfortable boots, and a simple flannel shirt beneath a light jacket. There were no security vehicles, no photographers, no assistants carrying schedules or phones. She looked less like the chief executive officer of a global company and more like someone happy to spend a quiet Saturday with neighbors she had only just met. Lily ran forward with an excited smile. "You came." Victoria laughed gently. "I promised I would." As they walked together through the festival, few people recognized her. Those who did politely nodded, but respected the peaceful atmosphere of the day. Victoria seemed grateful for that. She admired handmade quilts stitched by local families, listened carefully as retired farmers shared stories about harvest seasons from decades earlier, and purchased jars of homemade peach jam from the church fundraiser without mentioning who she was. Ethan noticed something surprising. She never rushed anyone. Every conversation received her complete attention. Every handshake felt sincere. It reminded him of the way his father used to stop whatever he was doing whenever someone needed to talk. Later that afternoon, Lily entered the children's pie contest while Ethan volunteered to repair a loose wooden bench near the community pavilion. Victoria quietly joined him, rolling up her sleeves without hesitation. "May I help?" she asked. Ethan handed her a screwdriver with a smile. "Only if you do not mind getting your hands dirty." She laughed. The best lessons of my life never happened inside a boardroom. Together they tightened loose bolts and replaced weathered boards while townspeople walked by offering cheerful greetings. Nobody applauded. Nobody took pictures. It was simply two people working side by side because something needed to be fixed. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the park, Lily hurried toward them holding a bright blue ribbon. "Second place," she announced proudly. Ethan knelt and hugged her. "I cannot be more proud." Lily looked at Victoria with sparkling eyes. "Daddy smiles more when you are around." The words were innocent, spoken without any expectation, yet they settled gently into Victoria's heart. She glanced toward Ethan, who looked slightly embarrassed before laughing quietly. For the first time in many years, Victoria realized she had spent decades building successful companies while forgetting that the richest moments in life often arrived without contracts, headlines, or applause. They appeared quietly in small towns beside repaired benches, shared laughter, and a little girl who believed that happiness was something people created together rather than something money could ever buy. As the harvest festival slowly settled into the soft glow of evening, strings of warm lights stretched above the town square like tiny stars brought down to earth. Families gathered around picnic tables, children chased one another across the grass, and a local high school band played familiar songs that everyone seemed to know by heart. Ethan watched Lily laughing with her friends near the pumpkin display, grateful for another ordinary day that felt far more valuable than anything money could purchase. Victoria stood beside him, holding a cup of warm apple cider, quietly taking in every detail around her. "I understand now," she said. Ethan looked at her with curiosity. "Understand what?" She smiled gently. "Why your father never wanted recognition. Places like this remind people who they really are." Before Ethan could answer, an elderly man approached carrying a small wooden box tucked carefully beneath his arm. His name was Harold Benson, the retired owner of the old hardware store where Samuel Walker had spent countless Saturday mornings helping neighbors repair broken tools. Harold smiled warmly at Ethan before turning toward Victoria. "I heard someone has been asking about Sam. Victoria nadie respectfully. He changed my life many years ago." Harold's eyes softened. "That sounds like him." He carefully placed the weathered wooden box on the picnic table. "I have been meaning to give this to Ethan for years, but somehow the right moment never came." Ethan frowned with surprise. "What is it?" Harold lifted the worn lid, revealing several carefully preserved keepsakes wrapped in soft cloth. There were old photographs, handwritten notes, a pocket notebook filled with measurements from repair jobs, and resting quietly in the center was a silver pocket watch whose polished surface still reflected the festival lights. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. "I have not seen this since I was a little boy." Harold nodded. "Your father sold that watch nearly 25 years ago. He said someone needed help more than he needed to know the time." Victoria slowly reached toward the watch without touching it. Her eyes widened with quiet recognition. "I know this watch." Ethan looked at her. "How could you?" Victoria smiled through gathering tears. "Because I spent nearly 15 years searching for it." Harold gently lifted the watch from the box and placed it in her hands. "About 6 years ago, a collector contacted me after hearing I had once owned it. He said a woman had paid far more than it was worth just to make certain it never disappeared again." Ethan looked back at Victoria, suddenly understanding. "That was you." She nodded almost shyly. "I never intended to keep it. I only wanted to make sure it found its way home when the time was right." She carefully placed the watch into Ethan's hands. The cool metal felt unexpectedly familiar, carrying the quiet weight of memories instead of wealth. Inside the cover, engraved in letters worn smooth by decades of use, were words Ethan had never noticed before. "Take care of people, and time will take care of the rest." Ethan closed the watch slowly, overwhelmed not by its value, but by the simple truth it carried. Around them the music continued. Children laughed beneath the lights. And for a brief moment, it seemed as though Samuel Walker's quiet wisdom had returned, not through speeches or monuments, but through a small silver watch that had traveled many miles only to remind everyone present that the greatest things we leave behind are never the things we own, but the lives we gently change. The following Monday morning arrived with the kind of quiet sunlight that seemed to wash every field, fence, and front porch in gentle gold. Ethan was repairing the wooden gate near his barn when a familiar pickup truck pulled into the driveway. It was Harold Benson again, smiling beneath his worn baseball cap. "I thought you might want to see something before I gave it to the Historical Society," he said, holding a weathered manila envelope. Ethan wiped his hands on a clean shop towel and invited him inside. Lily hurried over from the porch, curious as always. Victoria had returned to town early that morning for one last meeting before flying home, but instead of leaving immediately, she accepted Ethan's invitation for coffee. The four of them gathered around the same kitchen table where an unexpected knock had changed everything only a few days before. Harold carefully opened the envelope and removed a single folded sheet of paper. Sam asked me to keep this if anything ever happened to him, he explained quietly. He said I would know when the right people were sitting in the same room. Ethan unfolded the letter with careful hands. The handwriting was unmistakably his father's, steady, simple, and unhurried. He began reading aloud. If this letter ever reaches someone because of a kindness I once offered, then I hope you remember something important. Never feel that you owe me anything. The greatest thank you can ever give is to notice the next person standing alone. Kindness loses its purpose when it comes back looking for the one who started it. Let it keep traveling until it reaches someone who has forgotten that hope still exists. The room became perfectly still. Ethan looked toward Victoria, whose eyes glistened with quiet emotion. Samuel Walker had answered the question she had carried for 23 years with words he had written long before anyone knew she would return. Ethan continued reading. If my son is reading this, remember that your greatest inheritance will never fit inside a bank account. It will live inside the choices you make when nobody is watching. Protect your dignity. Offer grace before judgment. Give second chances whenever wisdom allows. Respect every person because you never know which life is waiting for one simple act of kindness to change its direction. Lily slipped her small hand into her father's without saying a word. Victoria smiled through grateful tears before reaching into her bag and removing one final document. She placed it gently on the table, not as a gift to Ethan, but as an invitation. It outlined the creation of the Samuel Walker Community Scholarship, funded entirely by her foundation, with no buildings carrying her name and no public ceremonies centered around her success. Instead, each year, one student from Cedar Ridge would receive an opportunity to pursue education. After demonstrating compassion, humility, and service to others, Ethan read every page before quietly nodding. My father would have said yes to this. Victoria smiled. Then that is all I hope to hear. Months later, the scholarship quietly changed its first young life, then another and another after that. The little farmhouse remained exactly where it had always stood, filled with laughter, honest work, and the steady love of a father raising his daughter with the same values he had inherited. Victoria visited often, never as a celebrated executive, but as a trusted friend who found peace where success had never been able to find her. And whenever someone asked how extraordinary things begin, the answer was never found in wealth or recognition. It began with an ordinary man who chose dignity over attention, grace over reward, and kindness that never expected to come home, yet somehow changed generations anyway.